It was November the 8th, 2016. The West in shock from Brexit that had happened a few months before. But no, the establishment felt confident. The one thing that would not happen in 2016 is that Donald J. Trump could possibly win the presidential election. Indeed, the New York Times the day before said it was a 98% probability that Hillary was going to win the election. Well, we watched as the results came in, and as the Midwest, in particular, the old Rust Belt sectors, voted for Trump. He won many of those states, actually, by very, very small margins indeed. He lost California hugely, but he finished up, actually, with a very comfortable majority on the Electoral College. Let's remind ourselves of the kind of mood and the kind of promises that Trump was making this week a year ago.
As I've said from the beginning, ours was not a campaign, but rather an incredible and great movement made up of millions of hardworking men and women who love their country and want a better, brighter future for themselves and for their family. It's a movement comprised of Americans from all races, religions, backgrounds, and beliefs who want and expect our government to serve the people, and serve the people it will. Working together, we will begin the urgent task of rebuilding our nation and renewing the American dream.
Well, that was Donald Trump a year ago, and of course he'd made a lot of big promises during that campaign, a lot of big changes he said he was going to bring in to the USA, and yeah, you know, I was an accomplice to it. I was a supporter. I spoke on stage with him in Mississippi and went round the spin rooms of the debates that followed thereafter. So, you know, my colours were nailed pretty firmly to the mast. I thought he was infinitely preferable to Hillary, and I felt that not just for America, but for us. So, you know where I stand on this, but a year on, I'm asking you, how's he doing? Is he doing well? Is he doing badly? And you can let us know what you think about the Donald by going and joining our Facebook poll. Go to LBC's Facebook page and give us your opinion by answering the question there. So just go to LBC's Facebook page and you can vote to say whether he's doing well or badly a year on. Now, to help me through this, I've got Professor Ewan Morgan, Professor of US Studies at University College London. Ewan, good morning.
Morning.
Well, he did make a lot of promises, didn't he, in that campaign?
Yes, he overpromised. He made a very famous speech at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania in October 2016, promised to do 10 major things in his first 100 days in office, and he's got a perfect zero for that, but it was almost impossible that he could have carried them off anyway. Yeah,
I think there were a lot of promises made. I mean, clearly his biggest failure, as I see it, is that he's got a majority in the House of Representatives, a majority in the Senate. So it's very unusual, isn't it, to have majorities there and to have a president from the same political party. And really, in terms of legislation, not much has happened, has it?
Well, that's true. Some things have happened. I think we don't quite get the full story in this country. I think Trump's major legislative successes have been relatively small ones, but he has rescinded a lot of what the Obama administration did in terms of executive orders in its last 2 years in office. But it is true that the Republicans are more powerful today than they have been since the 1920s in terms of the breadth of their political control, and one would have expected far more to be achieved. The signature failure is, of course, health care, but it's fairly evident that, in addition, that the promise of tax reform is not going to be met. There will likely be tax cuts, but I don't think there will be tax reforms in terms of sweeping changes in the tax structure.
And that, of course, given that the midterm elections are coming up next year, at the end of next year, that would be quite a blow, wouldn't it, to Trump's presidency?
Well, yes, but we've got to keep in mind that midterm elections are largely fought on local issues and state issues. The Democrats will try to make Trump the subject of the campaign, and he is not an asset to the party, at least at present. He's got the lowest third quarter approval ratings in Gallup poll history. Poll gave him 33% approval earlier this week. But at the same time, the Democrats are not sitting pretty. They remain a toxic brand for many Americans, and both parties appear to lack popular trust at the moment.
Isn't his major success, it isn't the one thing where he really has had a huge, and it may not just have been him, but the US economy is in pretty amazing shape, isn't it?
Well, the US economy has been growing jobs since the end of the Great Recession in 2010. So he can't claim credit for that. He can at least say he's done no harm. The big thing, of course, is that Wall Street is booming, and that is on the expectation of significant tax cuts and other benefits coming up soon. But the problem is Wall Street booming and Main Street booming are not the same thing. And what Trump supporters will expect him to do is deliver on his promise of better times for ordinary Americans by 2020. And I don't think that his current arguments that he's been stopped from doing things by the political establishment, the fake media, etc., are going to carry him through. He needs to do something.
Yeah, I mean, he will argue, of course, that unemployment is down to 4.1%, which is a 17-year low. He will argue that by killing off the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership and TTIP, that he's helped investment into American companies. I mean, he will claim a lot of the credit, of course, for what's happening in the economy, whether it's true or not. That's, what the incumbent has to live with, good or bad. But the one question I'm really curious to ask you about is, everybody saw the Trump victory as America's going to retreat from the world. America's going to put up, the barriers and not interest itself in global affairs. I think in foreign policy terms, he's rather surprised people, hasn't he?
Well, yes, he has. He's re-engaged in the Middle East and Afghanistan in a way that has surprised people. And, of course, I've heard his spokesman claim that that has delivered very significant results in terms of rolling back IS. And it is true that Trump said that he was going to make the defeat of IS one of his major, if not his major, foreign policy goals, and whatever credit he can justifiably claim, he is going to say that that is one of his major achievements. Of course, it leaves the question of the power vacuum that the collapse of IS leaves in the Middle East and how far Iran moves into that, and indeed Russia, but we shall see. That's in the future. The other big question, of course, is North Korea. He's been desperate to get the Chinese leader to cooperate with him in terms of getting the North Koreans to back off on nuclear testing. That shows no signs of succeeding. So Americans will definitely be holding him to account if the North Koreans go on in their current mode.
Yes, I mean, against that, I suppose he has woken the world up, has he not, to what's happening in North Korea and tried to build this big coalition. So overall, Professor Ewan Morgan, in a sentence, Trump, a year on, doing well, doing badly?
Doing badly, but not as badly as many people expected.
OK, thank you very much indeed for that analysis. Well, and on the LBC Facebook page, you're voting, and currently 33% of you say he's doing brilliantly, 67% of you say that he's doing absolutely terribly. And I'm going to ask Charles from Bagshot in Surrey how he thinks the Donald's doing a year on.
Hello, Nigel. Thank you for taking my call. Look, I think the only reason he's doing badly is because I've never seen a president that someone said he has never seen a president as unfairly attacked and unfairly treated by the whole establishment as any other president. Now, that wasn't Piers Morgan that said that. That's not your good self, sir, that said that. That was Jimmy Carter.
Absolutely, Charles. Absolutely, Charles. A remarkable piece in the New Yorker 2 weeks ago with 93-year-old former President of the USA, Jimmy Carter, who, Charles, was very much on the left of politics and so wouldn't agree with Trump on very much at all. But he said he'd never in his life seen a president so unfairly treated by the press.
Yeah, and I think one thing I'd like to see him do, which I said to the person who took my call initially, is he was promising to audit the Federal Reserve. That is the centre of the swamp. The Federal Reserve needs to be audited. Bill, you think the European Union is corrupt and losing money? They're minor league. They're minor league compared to the Federal Reserve. They lose billions. And where's all the money come? Where's all the money come from? All these disgusting and despicable wars like Iraq. It's all from the Federal Reserve. That needs to be audited. That needs to be reformed. And I think he's being attacked. And people think the midterms are that he's going to get Trump. The little story that's happening, which people are ignoring, is in the primaries for the midterms, non-establishment candidates are creaming the establishment candidates.
I know they are, Charles. I was involved in the Alabama upset myself a few weeks ago. No, Charles, you're right. But no, you've made the point. I think, Charles, the big point you've made there is that perhaps his biggest failure is that he's been unable to drain the swamp in Washington. He's been held back by his own party up on Capitol Hill. He's been held back by the judges, not just in Washington, but around the country. He's having a lot of trouble getting his agenda through. The American establishment, not just the Democrats, but many within the Republican Party, do not wish him well. But he's got some things very right as well. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:15. We're a year on from McDonald's victory, and my goodness me, weren't the establishment in total horror at the thought that he'd won. But we're a year on, and I'm asking you, is he doing well or is he doing badly? Is he doing brilliantly or terribly? And you can engage with this by going to LBC's Facebook page, and you can vote there. Currently, a third of you think he's doing really well, and two-thirds of you think he's doing really badly. And we had Professor Ewan Morgan on before the break, and I asked him that question in a very neutral, academic, and he said he's not doing very well, but nowhere near as badly as many people thought he would. Good question, Nigel, says Stephen in Walton on the Hill. What has Trump actually achieved? I couldn't say. Well, I will tell you what he would, if he was answering this for himself, he would say that he's done on trade deals what he promised he would do. He's got rid of these big trade deals that the previous administration wanted to enter into. He would tell you that he significantly cut regulations on businesses, and particularly on small businesses, and that's being felt throughout the US economy. He would tell you that illegal border crossings, illegal immigration, has significantly reduced. Last estimate I saw, it was down 36% estimated over the course of the last year. And I think what he'd say to you is that America's voice in the world is a lot bigger and a lot more significant than it was in the last years of Obama. And I say that because his first speech overseas was in Riyadh, if you remember. There he was with many of the biggest leaders of the Muslim world, saying to them, drive out of your places of worship the bad guys that are making life for all of us dreadful. And on North Korea, what has he tried to do? Well, he's tried to put together a coalition of countries who are prepared to stand up and do something, and not just to allow North Korea to develop full nuclear capability. Perhaps his biggest challenge is China, how he deals with China, what China's relationship with the West is going to be in the years to come. He's currently on a 12-day tour of Asia, where that, of course, will be very near the top. That and North Korea will be at the top of his agenda. Where he's failed is despite having majorities in both houses on Capitol Hill, he's failed to get major legislation through, and he has right now tax reform. A simplification of taxes, a slight reduction in terms of tax for working Americans, but a massive change in American corporate tax policy. And it's something that if he was to get through, would see hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean hundreds of billions of dollars. Yes, I meant that, because there's something like $2.6 trillion of US company profits sitting in bank accounts all over the world. The reason they don't bring it back is because American corporate tax rates are 35%, which is pretty much the highest in the Western world. If he reduces it and brings hundreds of billions back into America, the revenues that are generated from that will allow him to build some of the infrastructure projects that he promised. But can he get it through? Can he get those houses, despite having a majority there, can he get those houses to approve? And there are times when, you look at the Trump presidency and say, well, is he really a Republican? Or is he, in fact, pretty much an independent? Mike in Ware in Hearts has got a view on this. Mike, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, well, what I would like to say is that I've got family in America, and basically they're from different backgrounds. Some have done well, some not so well, but basically they all voted for Trump because they wanted to vote for change.
Yep.
Now, the reports that I've been getting from them suggest that, by and large, they think he's doing a good job. The problem has been that even in his wildest dreams, he couldn't have got through, or he hasn't been able to get through some of the things that he said he wanted to do, in the run-up to the election. His hands have been tied by legislation and opposition from the other parties and stuff like that. But by and large, they think he's doing well. I saw a program during the week where he'd opened up coal mines that had been closed down in one of the in one of the mid states, and basically it was a huge success. He'd brought back jobs and employment to the area, and that's what he said he was going to do, and he's done it.
Yeah, he's opened pipelines. Coal mines are opening. He said no to the Paris Accord, and whatever your view on that, again, it was an election promise that he has brought through. And Mike, in terms of jobs, in terms of job creation in America, fine. The US economy has been doing well since 2010, but in terms of job creation under his presidency, there's no argument. There's no denying it. He's doing remarkably well. But Mike, you are right when you say that people voted Trump because they wanted change. That is absolutely true. And ultimately, he's going to be judged on how much change he can get through. And there's only so much, Mike, he can do through executive orders. There's only so much that his own presidential powers allow him to do. He, at some point, has to find a working accommodation with Congress.
But can I tell you the other thing that came across from a family? The thing that was echoed by someone you had on earlier about, Jimmy Carter, the previous, one of the presidents, what he'd said about the media attack. It's truly frightening what's been happening in the media in America, according to my family out there, and I've seen the same thing is happening over here. It's truly frightening, the power and the influence that the media have got. If they don't like somebody, and you're a prime example, if they don't like somebody, you're given very little chance to air your views.
Well, do you know, Mike, I had this caller on earlier this week on my show, and it was a caller suggesting that actually it wasn't the Russians that had influenced the elections in America, it was the Jews. The Jews had used their influence in America. And I felt the call itself was actually quite anti-Semitic, quite unpleasant in tone. And I dealt with it by saying, Mike, I said, look, there's no question that the Jewish lobby in America is organised and powerful, but I'm not for one moment do I think they tried to influence the elections. I thought it was ridiculous. And that got interpreted by the pro-Hillary, anti-Trump American publications that I'd said something anti-Semitic and something wicked. So, Mike, if you think the media are vicious here, they've got nothing on the current American media. Mike, I thank you very much indeed for your call. How is Trump getting on with his wall? I'm asked by text. Well, they are making plans. But they've got to get the money, which is why I think getting corporate tax reform through and getting those billions, hundreds of billions, coming back to America is absolutely key. Trump has tried so hard to protect the US, he's the best president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and that includes Obama, says Chris. I'm a huge fan of Trump. Two things concern me, though. I want him to keep his promises and stop interfering in foreign lands. That farce has gone on for too long, says John. Quite a few of you are saying that actually he's not being very fairly reported. I wonder what Ben in Bristol thinks.
Hi, Nigel.
Good morning. Good morning.
Well, look, when you asked this question at the start of this hour segment, I thought, and it's not meant to disrespect, because I thought, ask a silly question, get a silly answer. The answer to this is like, you might as well send out a phone in, what does 2 and 2 equal 4? This guy is doing an amazing job. This is like a whirlwind to behold. I mean, the things you listed.
Ben, hang on. Ben, hang on. It wasn't that silly a question, because actually, on our Facebook poll at the moment, the majority think he's not doing very well.
I know, Nigel, you're a smart guy, Nigel. You know the answer. But the people out there don't like to admit the answer because it's kind of trendy. It's kind of cool and trendy and reading The Guardian and looking cool. I live in Bristol, the most liberal city in Bristol, in the country. Everyone loves to hate Trump. People love to hate Trump. If you mention that in a conversation, oh, my goodness. But, you know, I'm glad I'm on side. I stick with the winners. I backed him from the start. You just got to take one look at this guy. Even in the early primaries, he's made by God to do this job. He's smart. He's like, have you ever had a problem with your car and there's a mechanic, you've got a mechanic friend comes around, tweaks a few things, he says, no, you've got to sort this, you've got to sort that, you've got to do that. And America is undergoing a reboot. And he's got the brains to do it. And
do you know what, Ben? Do you know what, Ben?
He's got the people around him to do it.
What he's got is instinct. He has the most incredible instinct. As somebody who's a supporter and wishes him well, when I saw him take on the NFL, and these players that for the national anthem were going down on the knee, I thought to myself, what on earth is he doing? Taking on yet another fight. Surely he's got enough on his plate as it is. Here we are 6 weeks in. Big majority of the country agree with him completely. TV ratings for NFL have gone down because too many of these players are taking the knee and not standing for the national anthem. And big advertisers like Papa John's announced in the last few days that they're withdrawing some of their funding. So, Ben, the one thing he's got going for him is the most incredible instinct. There are some that say he should tweet less often. But he would say, Ben, would he not, that he won the election by reaching the American people on Twitter and going round the back of the mainstream media.
They don't like him tweeting because he says things that the media can't refute. And I just kind of, who cares if a president tweets slightly crass or silly things? That just shows he's human. He's just a bit of a bolshy character. The people who don't like Trump have usually got issues with people in authority, or they've got some issues with men or something like that, or whatever. He's just a little bit of a bolshy guy. You know, you need somebody like that. If Winston Churchill was on Twitter...
Well, his grandson is Nicholas Soames, and goodness me, he says some pretty extraordinary things. Ben, I thank you for your call. Ben, a big fan of the Donald, loves him, thinks he's a star. Maybe you think differently. Let me know if that's your view. If you think he's a disaster, tell me on 0345 60 60 973. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:30. A year on, is Trump doing brilliantly or is he doing terribly? And on our Facebook poll, and by going to LBC's Facebook page, you can engage with that if you wish to. 34% say brilliantly, 66% say terribly. And on text I think Trump is no better or worse than previous presidents. The difference has been the media's hostility towards him, sowing seeds of doubt in the minds of many. Well, the media are hostile towards him, but hey, he's pretty hostile towards the media, isn't he? You know, the CNN correspondent tries to ask a question and he sort of shouts fake news at them. And I love the one, because the BBC, the Donald is not a fan, I've got to tell you, of the BBC. And the BBC's correspondent, John Sopel, was there in the White House press room, put his hand up, started to ask a question. The president said to Sopel, "Which news organisation are you from?" Sopel said, "The BBC." He said, "Oh, yeah, another beauty," as if to say you're in the same camp as fake news and everybody else. So it has been the most extraordinary war between the establishment mainstream media and Trump. And his answer to it, in many ways, has been social media, where he goes round the back and he's got something like, I think it's 41 million followers he's got on social media. You may have seen his Twitter went down for 5 minutes the other day. A disgruntled employee who was about to leave Twitter blocked him out for 5 minutes, which some, his critics, said was the most peaceful 5 minutes they've had over the course of the last year, because he is on that machine pretty constantly. My next caller from Liverpool has the name of Portugal. Portugal, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Thanks for having me on.
Do you know Portugal? I've never met anybody with that name before. Where does it come from?
It's a nickname given to me by a friend.
Okay, fine.
Because I look. Well, she thinks I look blackish.
Right, and how would that...
Not quite blackish, light blackish.
Yeah. Right. Portugal.
Okay. So,
Portugal, how is Trump doing?
I think he's doing great. I think he calls a spade a spade. And I've got a few points of advice for him if you'll pass it on, Nigel.
I'll do my best.
This wall malarkey with Mexico, he doesn't seem to be getting taken serious on it. But Israel, this is a bit wonky. No one mentions the Israeli wall going up that goes around the olive trees in a wonky position, all higgledy-piggledy. So keep it straight. Tell him to keep it straight as possible.
All right.
And also, I think he's doing great on the NHS. Well, his medical things.
Obamacare.
Because, our NHS, there's 181,000 abortions, £600 plus pay at 181,000 plus per year. That is just going to sink the NHS. And 90% of them are paid for by the NHS. So, some things, are your own business.
We're getting a bit confused between things here, aren't we? We're getting a bit confused, Portugal. I'm going to have to move on. I'm sorry. I'm going to go to Will in Evesham. Will, good morning. How's he doing a year on?
Hi, good morning, Nigel. Yeah. Well, I think if we take the kind of media facade aside and just look at the evidence, I mean, so last week the indictment process has started with special prosecutor, with people clearly links, the Russian links are just going to carry on, and we'll see where that ends up. The impeachment process is...
There is no impeachment process.
Well, the Democrats are starting, aren't they? Yes.
Well, there is no... As we speak, there is no process.
I mean, his rating's the lowest there's ever been. And on top of that, the guy's a serial liar. I mean, never has it been said before of the President of the United States that when he says something, you can't actually believe what he's saying. And he did it on the first day. On the first day, he lied about the crowd that came to the inauguration ceremony. Why would he do that?
Well, look, I mean, when it comes to people making promises, Will, and keeping them, I mean, I sort of famously remember, read my lips, no new taxes, and that was George Bush Sr., and you could actually accuse all presidents of breaking. Where I will agree with you, Will, is you talked about the special investigation that's going on under Robert Mueller. I think the biggest mistake of the Trump presidency was the sacking of James Comey. I thought it was unnecessary to take on the establishment in this way. This has now led to a special prosecutor who already has gone way outside the bounds, Will, of his inquiry, because what he's supposed to be looking at is, was there collusion in 2016 between the Trump campaign and Russia, not the tax affairs of Mr. Manafort going back to 2006.
But hang on, I mean, again, you're distracting there, I'm afraid. Okay, I mean, yes, the special prosecutor, what he's finding out, George Papadopoulos, which is the real story there, who's pleaded guilty and obviously done some kind of plea. This guy was then dismissed by Trump as some kind of low employee that he didn't even know who he was. And I think almost within the minute there was a photograph published on Twitter of Trump in the meeting with this guy.
Yeah, do you know what, Will? They can publish photographs of senior people who meet thousands. I mean, how many people does Trump sit around a meeting table with in the course of the year? Thousands and thousands of people. Now, it may be significant and it may not. I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know, Will, is that it would appear that Hillary Clinton's campaign have been much closer to the Russians for a longer period of time than the Trump campaign.
Nigel, we're not here talking about Hillary Clinton, are we? And how many low-level employees? I mean, I would imagine to sit in the meeting with the president, I can't imagine many low-level employees having that kind of honour, because it should be seen as an honour. You're sitting in the room with the president of the United States as a foreign advisor, and you're a low-level employee. It's not credible, is it, Nigel?
What level he was at, I frankly have no idea. But what I do know is this Russia stuff just never seems to go away. It is wildly conspiratorial, and one of the reasons I'm so sceptical about the whole thing is that I've been named as a person of interest, apparently, to the FBI. We even had newspaper articles last week suggesting that I was at the centre of some spider's web of a giant global conspiracy, that I was somehow the bagman running Russian secrets between Assange and Trump. And I know all of that's untrue. Now, if you're trying to put together a story that says there are links, we could do the same in Westminster or in Brussels, for that matter, or in Washington with Saudi Arabia, or with any other country in the world, because there is a constant lobby of countries, of embassies. The question is, Will, do you actually think in your own mind that Russia had a significant effect on what happened in the American elections?
Well, that's why we've got a special prosecutor. It's not what I think. It's where the evidence lies. I mean, the beauty of this is that the kind of half full and half full, which is classic term about talking about the media this, the media that. We're in court now, Nigel. The court, has integrity. So he can huff and puff all he likes. But if you read the indictment, read George Papadopoulos' indictment, the evidence of collusion is very, very clear, and it is gathering. So you can puff and distract all you like, but I'm afraid the court, it's a slow grinding process.
Yeah.
But it'll come. And the other thing is...
And he could, of course, if he wants to, sack the special investigator, but I don't think he's going to do that. All of this was caused by the sacking of James Comey. I still think it's the biggest mistake he's made. Will, you had one more point you wanted to make?
Sorry?
You had one more point you wanted to make.
Yeah, well, the final point I was just going to say is, in asking this question, and you standing there as like an honest broker. Well, you're not an honest broker in this process, are you? You're not part of the, to describe fake media. You're part of the fake media, because what you spread, you have clearly very close links to Trump yourself. And I think to try and say, well, what do you think? When clearly you have very defined views on
Which is why, Will, if you were listening at the top of the hour, rather than going into this and giving my opinion, I got an independent academic, Professor Ewan Morgan was on the show from UCL giving his dispassionate assessment a year on of the successes and failures of Trump. So, Will, I haven't pretended on this to be completely neutral as a broker. I'm not. But I am saying, Will, that when it comes to this Russia conspiracy stuff, every time I read something about me being part of the Russian conspiracy, I know it's a load of old codswallop. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:45. We're a year on from Donald becoming the 45th US president, or at least winning the election, which happened on the 8th of November last year. I was delighted. I'd supported him in the campaign. I think he's got good instincts on the big stuff. I thought Hillary would have been a disaster. But of course, you ally yourself to someone like Donald Trump. Not everyone loves you for doing it, including Debbie here on Twitter, who says, you really are a Trump puppet, aren't you? Wanting another ride in his gold lift. It wasn't a gold lift, Debbie. The gold bit was the front door, all right? Just to correct that and to get it right. And yeah, actually, it was pretty remarkable that I was the first foreign person to meet him after he'd won that amazing victory. And what I saw was somebody who'd been actually, in many ways, he was pretty tired. I think the last day of the campaign, he did 5 of his big rallies all across America. He'd been going at it for weeks. He's a man of 71, but he's got the strength of an ox. And what I've seen with him, since that election, is somebody who actually wants to implement his agenda. And you can dislike his agenda, you can disagree with what it is, but he wants to implement that agenda. And time and again, he's being stopped from implementing that agenda by the judiciary, and indeed by members of his own party in Congress. But he does want to put into place the things he was elected on. Whether you like him or not, that's what he wants to do. Dawn is calling from Hunsdon. Dawn, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. First-time caller to your show. And
well, welcome.
Wonderful.
Welcome. So how's he doing, Dawn?
Well, unlike the chap in Ware, I think his name was Mike, who phoned in and he said he had family in America.
Yeah.
I, too, have family in America, from Charlottesville.
Right.
And they were, my niece was involved in that terrible riot. She was a nurse. They're all nurses, my sister, my nieces. However, that part is irrelevant. They were upset with him, the way he handled that. But I just think, and they feel, that he doesn't do himself any favours because he's so unpresidential. I think if you're a president, you need to have an aura of respect, and he seems to think he's owed it in some kind of way because he's the president. And just looking at him and the way he struts around and the way he's rude about people, his lewd comments, his rude comments, he just has a way of irritating and antagonising people. And if he was a little bit more presidential, whether you liked Obama or didn't like Obama, he was the epitome of someone who was presidential.
Yeah. Dawn, as a supporter, I have to concede to you in every way that he is unconventional in that presidential role. He has a completely different approach to it. It's certainly, having done business for many, many years in America before I got involved in politics, I did often notice that it was New Yorkers who had a particular directness and style and brashness about them, and I saw more of it in New York than I saw in any other part of America. So I do understand the comment, Dawn, that they don't see him as being presidential because it's not what they used to. I tell you what I would say, Dawn, and I wonder what you think about this, that's how he is in America. That's how he is in the White House. That's how he is in the Trump Tower. But when he turns up in Riyadh or in Warsaw or in Paris at these big overseas state occasions, that actually, I think he's surprised people how presidential he's been when he's been outside of America.
Well, not from what I saw when he's pushing people out of the way to get to the front of the photo call.
Yeah, but that's him, yeah.
I just think if he would do better with his own party and getting everything through in Congress, if he just came across as somebody that would listen to people, that's part of being a president. If it's not my way, it's the highway. And I'm going to sack you all. If you don't agree with me, well, you can get out. And that's exactly what he's done. He's trying to get himself surrounded by yes people that will agree with him to just feather their own nest.
Well, he's certainly there's certainly been quite a turnover of people around him, certainly inside the West Wing and there in the White House. Dawn, I completely understand the points that you're making. But all I would say is this: he's a 71-year-old self-made billionaire. He ain't going to change. That's just the way he is. And Dawn, as far as Charlottesville was concerned, what was it that upset them about the president's response?
Sorry?
What was it about Charlottesville that upset your relations?
It was just the way he handled the riots, and he didn't come out and condemn both sides. He didn't. He should have made him go to Charlottesville and seen the people in Charlottesville. And he just didn't handle it at all well.
No, he was in trouble because he condemned actually both. He said there was fault on both sides, and everybody thought he should have actually focused more on the extreme right, who had led to that demonstration in the first place. And whilst the extreme right in America do deserve condemnation, this group that call themselves Antifa, they, believe you me, are not angels by any stretch of the imagination, and we've seen a lot of violent, unpleasant protests that they've been a part of. So Dawn, listen, you make your points very, very well. And Dawn really saying that Donald Trump is not everyone's cup of tea. He acts in a way that we've never seen before in America, or anywhere, frankly, on the Western stage in terms of a big leader, but that is the way that he is, and he ain't going to change in a hurry. Theo says, I firmly believe that POTUS, in the end, will manage to implement his agenda, despite the massive resistance he is getting. Well, Theo, he may, but he needs to get tax reform, or most of that tax reform, through. It has to go through Congress, and if he doesn't get it through by November next year, even though the midterm elections in states are often, as the professor said earlier, determined by a lot of local issues, national issues matter too. And I do think that's the one thing he simply has got to get through Congress. Musa is calling me from Ealing. Good morning.
Yeah, hi. Good morning, Nigel. Obviously, I don't have much time to comment, but it's just complete lies you're saying on radio. Self-made millionaire.
No. I said billionaire.
He wasn't no self-made. He got a small loan from his father. Had he put that loan in the bank, he would have more money than he has today. He has 9
No, Musa. He got a few million from his father, which is telephone numbers to most of us.
Okay,
which is telephone numbers to most of us. But I did say he was a self-made billionaire. Apparently, he's worth $7 billion. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, my point is this, Nigel. I'll tell you why I agree with you, then I'll tell you why I disagree with you.
All right, go on then. The floor is yours.
He's better than Hillary any day of the week. That's a guarantee.
Right.
Okay. Hillary had a different agenda that wasn't good for either Europe or America at that. But with regards to the issue of Donald Trump, okay, let's look at his plan. His plan was to drain the swamp. He put 15 of the top Wall Street executives in his cabinet. He said that he was going to replace Obamacare. Mm-hmm. We saw what he brought to the American people. Well, 14% of the American people chose it. Well, 40% of the American people thought it was acceptable. He thought about, let's bring the taxes down for everybody. If you look at his tax plan, that's their own congressional budget that looks at his own tax plan, saying that most of Americans won't get the tax plan. They're saying the richest 1% is going to get most of the tax cuts. So tell me,
which is not true. Which actually is not true, Musa. The biggest tax cuts are coming for US corporations, and the point of that is to keep the money inside the country. But look, we're running out of time. A year on, Musa. A year on, has he succeeded or has he failed?
They're just plummeting him. They're just hitting him like. He wants to succeed, but they're not going to allow him to succeed.
You may be right, Musa. It's the last comment I can make on this call. Our Facebook poll, 34% of you say he's doing brilliantly, 66% say he's doing terribly. That Facebook poll will remain open. It'll be open until mid-morning tomorrow. Well, look, it's a year on. He's got one big thing going for him, and that is the US economy. As Clinton once said, it's the economy, stupid. It makes, in the end, a very big difference. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7. Coming up at 3 o'clock this afternoon, it's Alex Salmond. But up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Did I just hear Nigel quote Clinton?
I did.
Approvingly as well.
Well, he was right, though. Economics does matter.
Well, we'll tell him that. You said he was right. Coming up, a male model said that...